Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've been waiting for. A podcast for podcasters. This is Creating the Greatest Show, and I'm your host, Casey Cheshire. Join me as we interview podcast hosts and investigate the ingredients of a successful interview podcast. We'll talk mistakes, earned skills, powerful questions, and more. This show is sponsored by Ringmaster, completely done for you B2B podcast production. All right, here it is. It's not a fluke. We're back. So I can't wait to introduce the guest today. He is a serial entrepreneur, a builder, a leader, and a communicator, but the kind of communicator who really listens, which makes him an awesome podcaster. We're going to get into that. But then not only does he listen, but he also has no problem telling it the way it is, telling you how it is, which is why I'm so excited to talk to him today. Host of many podcasts, including the Association Strong podcast and another one, which he's well known for, almost 7 years plus of doing the EO 360 podcast, where he interviews the stars of the business world. Co-founder and CEO of PropFuel, Dave Will. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, Casey. So I'm flattered you think I'm a listener. I feel like I do more talking than listening.
Come on. You're a podcaster. We know you have to ask great questions and listen.
Well, that was one of the hardest things for me in podcasting is shutting my trap and listening, like actually letting other people talk, because like I get excited. I'm like a little puppy dog seeing somebody come in the door, like I get excited. I want to talk and tell them my opinions, and so I appreciate you saying that. I wonder if it's true. I don't feel like I'm a great listener, but thank you.
Well, let's find out. And so to dive into it, I want to ask you this question that we decided to start every show with this question.
Go for it.
And just go from there. Pull back the curtain for us on your show and share with us the most important strategy for a great podcast.
Well, I mean, I can't tell you the most important strategy for a great podcast. What I can tell you is my strategy across the handful of podcasts that I'm doing, and I'm dabbling in starting a third podcast specifically for my business and lead generation, which is your specialty, helping businesses drive leads by running a podcast. But that's a story for another day. The strategy I use is to fulfill my own curiosity in the podcast, and that's part of it. And maybe the second, make it a compound strategy. The second piece of it is to converse with somebody as if we're having a drink together or a cup of coffee or whatever. Like, to me, a podcast really needs to be conversational, like a radio show, right? And I think if it's too highly produced or too structured, it loses the human element. And I find it way more uncomfortable to listen to. Like I want a podcast to be, when I listen to a podcast, I want a podcast to be like I'm sitting in the room hanging out with people. Oh my God, Casey, like a flood of ideas are coming to me right now. One is the one that I think is really good. They do a great job at this is what's the one with all the famous guys, the actors?
Actor Studio, like when they sit down with the.
No, it's oh my goodness, it's and I'm blanking out because I'm on the spot, but it'll come.
You can like Google it.
Yeah, it's oh my goodness, it's such a good name too. It'll come back to me. Yeah, but the idea is like you have these three. Of course, something that helps is they're really famous and they have all these really famous friends.
Yeah.
And they come in and they it's just super conversational. Like they're all hanging out and listening to it in your car on your run or mowing the lawn. You feel like you're hanging out with them. So that's the idea. I also got the Oculus for recently as a gift, and one of the coolest experiences I had was watching Alex Honnold in this VR series he has, and what I thought was really interesting of course it was really cool to be on the cliff with him as he's climbing. But the other part I thought was really cool is there's a scene where he's in the kitchen talking to his wife, and you're sitting there. It's kind of creepy, actually. You're sitting there in the kitchen with them, and you can look around. It's like you're sitting in their house. And the same thing, he has a barbecue and has a bunch of friends over. And so you're sitting there. It's like you're sitting on a chair at his little barbecue, listening to all the conversations happening around you. And that's what I want. That's my strategy. That's what I want the podcast to be like. I want the people listening to this to be like the third person listening in almost as if they're ready to participate.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
my
like
strategy,
you can
brother.
smell the barbecue and you hear the different combos happening, and it's like you want to crack open your own beer and join in.
And if you come into a podcast with a list of questions, it just doesn't have that feel, man. It's just yeah. So that's, you do a great job at that, taking a conversation and running with it. You know,
Sure.
like instead of relying, I'm not saying don't prepare some questions, but I think the key is to be able to take a single question and let it branch out into a conversation.
Tell me about that. How do you pick? Do you pick one question? What's your take? I love that idea. Like a single question can turn into a whole convo. Because I've definitely been on podcasts where it's almost like the entire show is your rapid fire question time, where all they do is, okay, yeah, what's this question? Great. Next question, great. Next question,
Yeah.
great. And then there's no really response to anything. It's like they're trying to get through it.
So how do you do what?
How do you pick a single question and branch from there?
So the way I prepare for a podcast, I'd be curious if how you prepare and if it's any different.
Yeah.
But the way I prepare is ideally I know something about the person and they are um, well known enough so that I can Google them and learn a lot more. Or there's a bunch of articles, or there's stuff. I mean, it's a lot easier when the person's semi-famous. You know, like for instance, the founder of Reebok. You know, like that's a guy I interviewed. Lots of stuff on him. Tyler Hamilton was another guy I interviewed who was in the Tour de France. He was in the doping scandal in the Tour de France. Tons of stuff on him, including on Netflix, and like, so it's
Oh
really
wow.
easy to prepare for those. So I tend to, the big wave surfer who has some documentaries on Apple TV, and I mean it's like it's kind of, I like interviewing people like that because there's so much material to get you thinking about them that it makes it really easy. I think it makes it really easy to just, it sparks your curiosity. So then I take that curiosity and I try to turn it into a story before I even know the answers. Like maybe it's a chronological thing, maybe it's topical. And so I'll create a series of questions and group them by topic. And I'll try to visualize like 3 or 4 conversations that I want to have and a series of questions that might fall into that particular conversation. Now, what I'll find sometimes is even from the introduction, I'm still introducing them halfway through the podcast. Now, to me, that's not well structured. That's a fail. But that happens sometimes because I get so curious and I ask them something in the middle of my introduction. I'll jump in and ask them something, and before you know it, we're in a deep conversation and I haven't even finished the introduction. So I'm not proud of that. I don't think that's necessarily something to copy, but it speaks to, I think, the answer to your question, which is how do I branch off? And the way I branch off is I get really curious about somebody.
Yeah,
You know?
I feel that, right? So you're saying you sacrifice the agenda,
Oh,
you're not
totally.
suggesting we all do it, but what you've done is you're saying I should finish this agenda, but screw it. I really want to know this answer, and you go for it. But that's got to be something that enables you to keep going 7 years, year after year. If you're satisfying your curiosity, you'll do it forever, right?
Well, yeah. So that's the other thing is like, I think you can learn how to podcast but there's just certain things that people are good at or enjoy doing, and usually they're related, right? If you enjoy doing it,
Yeah.
you're probably generally good at it. That's not always the case, but um, or if you're good, if you enjoy doing it, you're going to eventually become good at it in most cases. Um, and so there's a little bit of uh, um, personality that comes, like when I go running with friends and somebody joins us for a run that we haven't met yet, my friends make fun of me because, well, they tease me. They're not making fun of me. They tease me because it's just like a podcast. Like I'm asking this person all kinds of
I
questions.
bet.
Running with somebody for me is very much like doing a podcast because I'm sincerely in the midst of a conversation and I'm curious about them in most cases. And that's what it takes for me to have a good conversation in a podcast. Is I need to have some sincere curiosity about a person.
The sincere curiosity that was fueled by the research ahead of time. And I heard you talk about 3 or 4 conversations you want to have. So where some people I think prep questions, you were prepping the almost like the broad topic. You mentioned, grouping your questions by category. So in your mind, you're saying, I want to have a conversation about this topic,
Yeah,
and then
totally.
all there's probably like 1,000 follow-up questions that come from that one topic you want to have.
Yeah. Like, there's a guy I interviewed, an Israeli guy that built and sold the business for something like over 100 million, like a ridiculous sale. I think it was like
Wow.
160 million or something like that. And it took him 14 months. So naturally, there's a story in there. I want to know about that window of time, right? That's a
Jeez.
conversation. I also want to know about the sale. Like, so there's another conversation. It's all about the sale of the business. Another conversation is around the sentiment and the feeling post sale, right? So there's some examples. I got some advice from a woman. This actually came through EO. EO hired a consultant or something. Her name's Cassidy Atkins, and I didn't keep in touch with her or anything, but EO put me in touch with this person who listened to a series of the podcasts I do, EO 360, and she critiqued them. I thought it was really cool. And one of the things she said to me that I thought was awesome, just a really, really cool concept, is she's like, a podcast is a theater of the mind. Isn't that cool? A theater of the mind. And so if you think about it like that, you're creating a series of a story or a bunch of acts sandwiched together. And so that's how I see these conversations. Each conversation is an act or a scene. I mean, however you want to,
It's a
whatever
great picture.
metaphor you want to use for that. But I love the idea of the theater of the mind and painting a picture. One of the things she said is you want to focus on turning this person into a character. Now, I'd argue you're not actually turning them into a character. Everybody's a character. It's just you need to uncover it. You have to find the character in people, because oftentimes the character isn't at the surface. The character oftentimes lies under the surface.
How do
That's
you
why,
surface that?
authors, for
Yeah.
example, they want to tell you all about their books. And they want to like, they bring them in the podcast and they're like, great, there's a book promotion. But there's nothing about the character in there. And so,
Tell me about that. I literally experienced that, and I've actually been frustrated by interviewing an author who I couldn't break through this like veneer of well-polished author questions. And for me, I wanted to connect, and I never felt that with this particular offender. And try as I might to even ask the goofiest questions about ice cream, I couldn't get through to like the real. How have you dealt with authors? I know you've talked to so many of them.
yeah, so Dan Heath is one guy. He wrote Upstream. He has a whole bunch of, what other books did
Yeah,
he write?
he's got a lot in there.
Yeah, he's
Power
got,
of Moments,
the Power Moments, a big
Oh, he
one.
made to stick.
The
Yeah.
Switch was another popular one, Made to Stick. Yeah. So yeah, he's got a lot of cool books. He did a lot of them with his brother. They're both super, super smart guys. So I brought him into, and he's a really nice guy, a real academic, as is his brother. But so I brought him in, and he really wanted to talk about Upstream. And I was asking him about, what's the writing process about? And at some point he said something like, well, we should talk about the book maybe. And I was just like, Dan, people could read the book. Like, that's cool.
Mm,
I really want to get into who you are. And, so was Dan happy with that podcast? I don't think so. I don't think he left feeling as though it was a major win for him. Uh, Most of the time, people, I think, enjoy a good conversation. I think Dan might have had a motivation to promote by
mm,
coming on the podcast, which I
hmm.
totally get.
Totally get that. Yeah.
And he wasn't a jerk or anything. He was really a nice guy about it, but he really wanted to direct the conversation towards the book. Yep. But at the end of the day, who's the one asking the questions, you know?
Right.
Like, I saw
Right.
an interview with Tom Cruise. Some guy, some British guy was interviewing Tom Cruise. And he started asking about Nicole Kidman, and Tom Cruise was like, you're out of line. And he goes like, maybe, but this is what people want to know. Like, I'm asking this question because I'm curious and other people are curious about it too. He's like, well, I'm not going to answer it. So, you can, I think as the interviewer, it's your show. And you can, I would argue that if it's somebody you need to be nice to, if it's a client, if it's a friend or family, you have a little less leverage. But if it's somebody that you really just want to create an entertaining theater of the mind, then it's up to you where to bring it. So I don't know if that answers your question. How do I get people off their book? Well, I ask questions about their childhood. I
Mhm.
ask questions about their relationships and about their feelings. I tend not to ask questions that teach me something I can learn on the internet.
Right. Right. Makes total sense. And that desire to promote is interesting as we sort of nerd out on. I mean, that's why these guests are typically joining as we're either promoting them or their book or something. So there is this sort of mutual need for each other, but sometimes that can be overshadowed. I had a really interesting conversation with David Meerman Scott, marketer, too many books probably, just came out with a new one. And he even let me know ahead of time that he had been on 150 plus podcasts. So I was very unique. No, I was one of the 150. But he was a little
That's
tired.
nice. You're another one.
Yeah, he was a
Yeah.
little tired, and his intro wasn't very. He wasn't very happy to be
Oh,
there.
he wrote Fanocracy. I remember
Yeah,
that book.
like the PR rules and all that. But one of the things he did is he had them all drop on the same date and time. It was very smart marketing, right? To have that all happen. But I was able to get. He wasn't the offender. I won't mention. He was able to talk to me about. He has a passion for Japan and Japanese culture. I believe he even married a Japanese lady, and so we were able to talk about a lot of that. And he co-wrote his latest book with his daughter. So it felt really good. And so I like your advice around asking the non-book questions, or maybe even prepping them in advance, or let them get that off their chest, right? Get your little book thing off your chest, but then let's really roll up our sleeves and get to it.
I don't ignore it, by the way.
Right.
I'm all for promoting their book and getting them to talk about, tell us about it. But
Yeah.
then, let's go on. I don't want to drill down into I don't want them to give me a summary of the book in the podcast.
Right. Right. On that note, do you read the book before the podcast if they
Oh
haven't read it?
man, I should, right? Like, I don't, but the reality is I don't.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
So you feel
that's
like you should, but you
that's
don't?
of course I feel like I should. I
Yeah.
totally should.
Yeah. Yeah.
And oftentimes I'll admit to it. And I don't want to take the position that I've read the book.
Read the cliff notes online. 5 minutes.
Sometimes I do. Here's my deal with books is like I enjoy reading novels and I like listening to business books. I'm just I struggle to focus on the written word, and
Yeah.
maybe it's an ADD thing. I don't want to blame it on anything like that. I've always struggled with reading, which is funny because my father was an avid reader and a Cornell grad, and it's. I remember this is totally off topic, but I
Yeah.
remember when I was growing up seeing my dad read a book on the 50s. And the book was the biggest, thickest book I've ever seen in my life. And you open up and the words are small and there's no pictures. And it was
Wow.
like literally like 1,500 pages. of content about that one decade.
Wow.
Unbelievable. So I can't do that, man. So do I read the books beforehand? No. Should I? Yes.
It's interesting. The person I talked to before, a good friend, Ethan Butte, he was sharing with me, he always reads them first, or at least 30%.
Kudos to him, man. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And he underlines and he extracts takeaways and puts them into notes. It was really an interesting, challenge for me, because I've kind of always felt that my favorite way to consume it, like you're talking about, is audio, but also having the author right in front of me. So maybe don't give away all of the book, but but teach me what's a little bit in the book, and then inspire everyone else to want to, go buy it. Right.
Sometimes I'll cheat, Casey, and I'll like check out the book. I'll read parts of it, just to get a feel for like some of the elements, and
Sure.
if I agree or disagree, because I really like debating with our guests too. And there have been some books I've read, like Mark Worcester, a mutual friend of ours, wrote a book, um, something like it's how to live the fucking great life or something like that. Like it's how to live a great fucking life or something like that. And
It's absolutely fucking amazing living a life you love.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And so I read that one. It's a friend, and I wanted to read it to begin with, so I read that book, and then brought him into the podcast, and we talked about it. And I debated a lot of the stuff with him. There's stuff in there about psychedelics and about weed and the history of weed and philosophy and pharmaceuticals. So there's a lot to discuss and debate. So I did that with him. And so upon occasion I'll have good content from books, but rarely do I read the entire book beforehand.
Tell me about this debating. That's fascinating, because I think we talked a little bit about the 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 power balance of, if they're a family or friend or a customer, you're not putting people on the spot, and it's not a talking head show where you're debating. But how do you get into a debate with some of your guests and not make them feel like they're under the gun, or maybe they do?
I I don't know.
Just do it.
Yeah.
These
Well,
are these
let
concepts
me
we just kind of do sometimes.
let me chew on that for a minute. I mean,
Yeah.
it's an interesting question. How do you debate respectfully, I think is what you're saying.
And let me just sort of put one out there for you. There was a guest I had on one of the shows, and he had this very polished surface level. So I'm like, oh, tell me, I want to learn more about this. So I'd ask follow-up questions. And every time I asked sort of follow-up questions, it became very clear that there was nothing underneath. Like, all he had was the surface. And then
Hmm.
I started getting pissed, because I'm like, this is bullshit. And so I'm like, oh, what's the magic that makes this work? I want to know, like, how do I do this? And he's like, basically hire me as a consultant, And I was just like, oh, I was kind of like, fuck this guy. Like, it made me so mad. And part of me was like, I want to call him on it. The other part was, just
Be nice.
get out of it, be nice. I ended up being nice. And afterward, he was so gracious and so thankful. And so he's such a nice guy, right? It was bullshit, but he was such a nice guy that I just sort of let him escape. And I'm like, this isn't that show, but I kind of wanted to make it that.
Do you ever do a podcast, and at the end of the podcast you're like, God, that was boring. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
just I like there's been some people where on paper there's a great story, and there's no way I'm going to allude to any of them, but there's been a handful where on paper it's a great story.
What's the name rhyme with? No, I'm just kidding.
It's a great story, but as I'm drilling into it, like they're just not a really great storyteller.
Right.
And so there's certain things that, and I couldn't tell you what they are, but I try to turn it around. I turn on my humor and try to make it a little more entertaining. I rudely try to cut them off if they're going on and on and on and on and on about something that's just uninteresting. I guess I could edit it later, but I don't feel like editing the podcast. So it's like, so anyway, yeah, so I've had some of those. Going back to the question about debating, I think it becomes natural to me to challenge people, and I think it can be annoying at times. My wife will tell you, will agree with the annoying habit I have of challenging her comments and thoughts. Um, but I think people can tell when you're saying something just because you want to be right versus saying something because you want to try to figure out the truth. And by truth, I mean, I believe in the absolute truth. I believe there is a truth to everything. I don't believe any of us know it. Like there's, uh, I'll get all philosophical for you. There is or there isn't a God.
Mm,
It's like, or maybe I guess you could argue it comes down to, well, what is God, right? There
right.
is or there isn't a God. I don't know which is true, but I'm constantly in search of the answer to that. I'm not judging people that go to church, uh, uh, and I'm looking for answers myself. But there's an example of something where I think there's an absolute truth, and I don't think anybody actually knows the answer. And what's interesting is there's certain things you can prove true and prove false, but there's some things that can't be proven, and therefore it's possible. Unicorns are an example. You can't prove that unicorns don't exist. And therefore, it's possible they do.
Right.
Sasquatch. Uh, uh, and for me, where am I going with this? I have no idea how we got into this thing, but
We're about to prove God
yeah, I
exists or
know,
not.
I
Otherwise,
know. So, but in terms of challenging stuff and
yeah.
debating stuff, I think it comes with a true curiosity for trying to find um, uh, truth. Not to suggest that people are lying. That is not at all what I'm suggesting. But to me, truth comes down to understanding there's different perspectives of things. So when people say something, oftentimes I'll go with the opposite path to see if there's weaknesses, to see where does truth live. And so anyway, that's kind of how I handle debate and challenge. And I think people, I need to know when to stop too, because it can get frustrating and annoying too.
But to your point, though, if you're following the truth, and I think for me, sometimes on my marketing show, I'm actively trying to figure out how to do something even for my own business. So I had a great conversation with the founder of Toma Toma, and it was all about brand. It was like an hour and a half masterclass on brand, and he kept saying, "Great question." I don't know if you got this right. They're like, "Oh, great question, great question." It's like, yeah, these aren't. It's not because I'm good at. I actually am trying to learn how to do this so I can apply it right now. These are like me trying to apply what you're saying, in my daily business life. So that's where the question came from. Is me not knowing the answer.
Yeah, yeah. Toma Toma. Is that? That's not the luggage company, is it?
No, no, no. They're just branding specialists down in Florida.
All right, all right.
Had a good time. Martin is his name. Martin Toma. Shout out to a master class on branding. But yeah, but it was where it was. I was just literally learning. I think that's what I enjoy. To your point, all about curiosity. This is like a great conversation about curiosity. I want to shift. We talked a little bit about authors, uh, and you've had the pleasure, the power, the interesting conversations with famous people, or you've said semi-famous, like semi-sweet chocolate, right? But tell me about what shifts, what changes, what do we have to be more cognizant of, if at all, when we talk to someone who has that presumption of more notoriety?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't I don't know if anything changes. Like that's why I'm silent right now. I'm
Yeah,
trying to think
we'll
what
leave that
changes.
in too. There's no need to edit out. I mean,
No,
these are real thinking thoughts.
that's well, yeah, because that's a really hard question. Um, my first reaction was, okay, well, you don't need to introduce the founder of Reebok as much as you need to introduce the founder of Toma Toma.
Right.
But having said that, like you're gonna you're gonna
Yeah.
anyway. And it's so like I don't think there's much of a difference. The biggest difference for me is I actually get starstruck sometimes.
Ah, yeah.
And so when I'm starstruck, I I have a harder time challenging somebody. like and so like the founder of Reeboks, he's like 85 years old, and I'm kind of starstruck by this
Yeah.
guy. Like, it's amazing what he's done and is the life he's led. And but there's also the element of, I want to be respectful to my elder.
Yeah.
He really is my elder, and I want to be respectful to that, which is a little bit of a traditional perspective. David Cancel, founder of Drift.
Yeah.
Drift is the online conversational marketing platform. He's a hero of mine. I think this guy is absolutely one of the coolest entrepreneurs, and many people don't know who he is. But I was kind of starstruck by him, because here I am. I got a chance to talk to a guy that I've read his books. I think he's created some incredible businesses. I love his perspective. So I was a little starstruck by him. So there's those situations. I don't think I handle someone who's famous any differently than somebody who is unknown. I think the formula is really, it's the same, and it's to focus on the character. And the other thing I'll say, going back to the conversation about challenging and debating, nobody wants to listen to two people in total agreement all the time. It's boring. Like, you want some drama. You kind of want to go up against the edge of uncomfortable.
Right. I disagree. Damn it. I agree. Ah.
Well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you say to that?
What do you say to that?
That's not right. You're wrong.
Well, I also think there's something magical about, which is why I like this podcast, this style, and I respect you really thinking about the answers. Is that sometimes my favorite conversations are when neither of us have that truth. Neither of us have found that truth.
You got to figure
Where
it
sometimes
out.
an author feels like not only did I find the truth, I wrote a book about the
And they
truth,
know
right?
it. And
And they know
that's
it.
it. Yeah, this is
Right.
the way.
Seth Godin telling you what marketing is. I guess I'll just take you at your
Okay.
word.
Yeah.
But no, when we're trying to piece out what is that, so I want to try that with the starstruck. Nothing changes in the prep, but there's something about, what does it feel like? How do you recognize when you're starstruck? And or do you have any recommendations for how to get out of it, or how to just keep your head?
So when I was in college, um, there was a girl that
Isn't that how all great stories begin?
there was a girl. There was a girl in college, and I was smitten by this girl. Her name was Kelly, and I'll save the last name. I don't know why.
Shout out to Kelly. We'll put her in the show notes.
Yeah, I don't know why. Just to be respectful, I guess.
Oh, no. Oh, of course.
And I, although I have nothing at all bad to say about her, but so for some, this is like, I don't remember what year it was, but I was young and didn't know what to do when it came to girls. But I remember every time I saw her, I'd run up to her and I'd be like, "Hey, Kelly, hi, Kelly," and I talk. And this girl, she like dated all the sports guys and stuff, and I was in the marching band. And so every time I ran up to her, I was like, "Hey, Kelly, how are you? Hi, what's up? What you doing?" And I remember like kind of joking around with her a little bit, and I think I asked her out like 15 times. So I'm playing basketball one day in the field house in between classes. I remember my book bag was on the side, and bear in mind, she was dating at one point one of like the star basketball players at UConn, and so she came up to me because I think she probably enjoyed the admiration. So she came up to me and started shooting around with me for a few minutes, and she's like, "All right, tell you what, I'll go out with you if you make this shot." Now, a smarter lad would have taken the ball and done a layup, right? But instead, I applied all these rules and I decided I had to take the shot from where I was when she said that. And I missed, and we never went out. So that's the end. What an awful ending to the story. I should make up a new ending to that story. But I I think the new ending to that story wouldn't be appropriate for this podcast. Needless to say, the feeling I had when I would talk to Kelly was the feeling I get when I'm starstruck.
Hmm.
And we all have had that feeling before. And the challenge with it is the same feeling you get when you're smitten with somebody and you don't know what to say, is because your mind goes blank, and you that's the real challenge. And I think the way around that, I think I did the same thing in college, is actually write down things to talk about, right? So that you can stay on track. It's like bumpers when you're bowling. Make sure that there is things to talk. Embarrassingly, I really did do that in
That's a
college.
great story,
I
man.
was nervous
Absolutely
about.
great story.
Well,
It's
yeah,
it's like the
that's.
butterflies, right? It's like
Oh
that,
yeah,
whatever that is, and your mind
and
just, yeah.
it's a little less pronounced now as an adult, because I realize I have much less to lose. Um, I didn't have much to lose with Kelly either, but for some reason, in the moment, you feel like it's everything. So, if
Right.
I'm talking to David Kinsell or Reebok guy or Priceline guy or any of these, big wigs that you're just super impressed with, and you want to be their friends, right? You want them to be like, "Oh, you're great, Dave. We should hang out and have a beer sometime." But you don't have much to lose. So as I age, I find that I get less nervous about stuff like that. Kind of like speaking engagements, right?
Yeah.
Like I once you become proficient in your craft, you ultimately you end up speaking more often in public about it. And there's it's good to get a little nervous, but the reality is the more you do it, those nerves dissipate faster.
All right.
Like I remember getting frozen when I was in grad school and I had to go give a talk somewhere. And now it's like I get healthy nervous. I get
Yeah.
excited. And then as soon as I'm up on stage, it all goes away and it's on. And so anyway, that's kind of the case now. It's a lot different than when I was smitten by Kelly.
Submitted by Kelly. And then I think what's helped me too is realizing that these people, maybe not the Kellys of the world, but maybe a less attractive author that you're interviewing, the real people, and just sort of like trying to like put the humanity back on them. And I don't, and they appreciate that too, right? It's the people that are coming up to you and asking for a selfie. Those are the people, they're putting you on like a different
Yeah.
relationship pedestal, right? You are famous person, I am fan, and I'm trying to put us on the equal grounds on this, my podcast, but you're famous, but let's just be human together, right? And
Wouldn't it be great if you could
yeah,
remember that when you're meeting girls that you're enamored with back in college? Like I wish I could go back to college with that mentality of like uh just human. We're just human, trying to
yeah,
connect with each other. And if you can kind of get out of your head and everything you've painted and this pedestal you've created for these people, it'd be a heck of a lot easier to have a good time and laugh and just let your curiosity flow.
right, get beyond the branding and all the
I think
surface level things.
Let's. I want to go back to the very first question. What's my strategy? I think
Yeah,
that my strategy is just to let curiosity flow. I think that's it. I really do. In having this conversation with you, I think this idea um of just letting your curiosity flow and feeding that, and what I mean by that is like it takes a little prep work to spark your curiosity. In order to keep your curiosity organized, you have to plan, but letting your curiosity flow, I think that is probably what I would dub my strategy for podcasting.
I love that, man. I love that. Let it flow. Let it
Let it
flow. And
flow.
and there's
Let it
things that can get
flow.
in the
Let
way of
it
it. Like
flow.
we got to
Is that a
clip that.
song? It's a Disney song, I think.
let it flow.
Yeah.
You think we'll get a cease
Thank
and
you very
desist
much.
from
Thank
Disney on Elsa?
Pretty sure not based on how I sang that.
Yeah, yeah. No Shazam in the
Yeah,
world is going to
they're not
identify
gonna
that one.
worry. They're not
Yeah.
gonna worry about it.
Man, this is so good. Well, really, I don't know. By the way, do you have a heart stop?
Nope.
Cool, because I
All
did
day
this
long, baby.
all day. This is an all
All
day.
day
Okay,
long.
let's do
Let's
it
keep
because
talking.
I thought
You take a 5-minute break to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
he would come back with our sandwiches in hand. Yeah, I mistakenly thought, yeah, I could talk about podcasting for an hour. No, you can't. There's so much to this. So I love the shift to this more linear approach. You've talked a little bit already about the prep. Could you talk to me about any sort of the tactical things you do to prep? Do you write out, a prep doc each time, or you mention certain questions? I love to walk through that, and then eventually how you start, and then how you finish a show.
So I think I've done now, it must be like 160 episodes for EO 360.
Wow.
And not much has changed in the format. So I used to write down a lot more. Now I tend to write down a couple notes about the introduction. And I've been coached to this person I told you about a while ago. What was her name?
Cassidy.
Cassidy Atkins. She said, keep the questions shorter, be more direct. She told me to shorten my introductory clip. I think we tend to go on and on in terms of trying to introduce somebody. You don't need that. Like, all you need is enough of an intro to get people to stick around for the next few minutes. And if you spend too much time in the intro, people are gone. That was kind of her lesson to me. It's like, just give me something good enough to make me curious enough as a listener to want to stick around. So in terms of my prep, that's my mindset when I'm prepping. Is I'll write down a couple things. I definitely do not go into everything this person has done, all their accolades. That stuff will come out in the podcast if it's important, and if it's not important, well, it's in their LinkedIn profile. So I used to do something, and I kind of like it, but I never got any like real positive feedback about it. I never got negative feedback about it. I just got no feedback, and it's for whatever. And I just don't have time for it every time. I used to do this thing, this or that, I would call it, or no, I called it boxers or briefs. That's what it was, but it was basically like this or that, and it came from. You remember back in some reporter asked Bill Clinton, boxers or briefs?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of where the
What was his
concept.
answer? I don't remember his answer.
I don't either. I think the question was more entertaining than the answer.
I agree.
But I would go that route, and I'd be like, khakis or jeans, Porsche or Tesla, pickup or sports car, or power boat or sailboat, mountains or ocean. It's just stupid little things, and that's I don't know if that's part of the structure of a podcast, but I would end with that. Kind of miss doing that. I haven't done that in a long, long time.
What do you like about it? What do you like
I,
about that section? Like that kind of is like a rapid fire, but
it's silly.
it's so rapid that it's like this or that. It's not like give me your favorite ice cream. You're just like this or that. You pick.
Yeah. Chocolate or vanilla. Yeah.
Did you change it each guest, or was it
did.
always?
Yeah,
Okay,
I would
so it wasn't like
usually.
you could add up the votes and go. Most people do Tesla.
Oh, that's interesting. No, I would oftentimes ask this or that, or boxes or briefs specific to what they know, something related to them. And then I always had like the standard ones, like khakis or jeans, which I don't know why that's intriguing to me. I think I'm going to start doing that again. So anyway, that just goes into the structure and how I prepare. So a very short intro, a couple bullet points about the intro. I don't write it out. I used to write it out. Now I just have a couple bullet points, which surprisingly forces me to keep it shorter. You would think quite the opposite, actually, that meander on. But a couple bullet points helps me keep the intro shorter, a little more conversational. I list out a bunch of questions organized by conversation, organized by topic area. And then in some occasions, I'll add in those Boxers or Briefs series, and then I'll wrap up with some sort of question looking into the future. And I always add in a part about how to contact them. The other thing I'll do is before we actually kick off, I always want to plug something for the guest if they're interested in having something plugged. So like, what is the one takeaway? What do you want people doing? Do you want them to hire you as a speaker, as a consultant? Do you want them to go to your website? Do you want them to download a ebook or a white paper? Do you want them to buy your book? Like, what is it you want out of this podcast if a listener were to do something? And so I'll end with that. And sometimes I'll sprinkle that in the middle as well. The other thing that I was coached to do more of is ask people to subscribe and share with a friend. That will help the views.
It sounds like a great structure. It's not confining, but it definitely gives you the ability to keep it moving if in case you get starstruck or you run out of conversation, follow-up questions, you have that next place to go to.
Yeah. I think you got to be, in order to take that approach, you better be comfortable in your ability to carry a conversation on the spot too, though, right?
Right.
I think, I know you and I have been doing this long enough, so we're comfortable with a microphone in front of our face and carrying a conversation. But I don't know if I was like that right away. I felt like I needed to have my list of questions. Fortunately, I don't think I ever just went through a list of questions.
Right.
Like I said,
It definitely can help having them for sure.
Yeah. And many times I won't even hit all the questions.
Right.
And I'll jump around too.
You have to be okay with that, right? Like they're there as like a bonus grab bag of questions. You don't have to get each one to make it a good show.
What tool do you use what do you put your notes in?
Google Docs.
Oh, that's good. I use Evernote.
That makes sense. But see, what on my team, the producer actually preps a bunch of things behind the scenes.
It needs to be shared.
We use a template the same prep doc that we have is used every time for the prep call, but then also we use that same doc for the show. So I when I go to do a prep call, I pull open that doc already prepared. It has some tidbits on them in their intro, and I'll tweak it when I'm on the guest doing the prep. And then for the show, I just pull that same doc up.
You've heard the podcast EO360 at least. What do you think? I mean, you're a pro when it comes to podcasts and editing and managing them and delivering them. How would you critique that podcast? What do you think I could do better in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually,
and you're not going to answer it, are you?
No, actually I wrote a note. Like, I think for my prep for this show, I need to listen to like a recent episode so that I can engage in that kind of conversation. I know I've listened to it, but I can't tell you the last one, and I can't tell you like what kind of particular critique to give you.
Yeah, I kind of put you on the spot with that too, to say, hey,
that's okay. No, I mean, it's important, and the show will develop, so next episode or a few episodes from now, you'll hear me say, oh yeah, so XY show, you like doing this for, I think it'd be even better if I was able to tell you about your own show format back, with authority and say, yeah, I noticed you added this in there. Well, yeah, you haven't done khakis or jeans in a while. Tell me about that.
That would be a pretty cool element. I mean, it's a lot more work for you, but that'd be a pretty cool element of your show to say, hey, so I've listened to your podcast. Here's what I love. Here's what I don't like.
Right. That could be value for the guest back, right?
That's tough to do though, isn't it? Like, how do you tell somebody this unless they ask? These are the things that I don't like.
Constructive if they want it, but otherwise you don't have to. It's usually pro tips level, right? So it's not like, the folks we'd be interviewing on this show are just getting started and totally get that. What's interesting though is it's our team actually gives producer notes just like that for every show we produce behind the scenes. So it's like, hey, watch out for the triple question. Sometimes people ask a triple question. Where are you from? How was it like growing up? Did you know you're going to be on, right? And you're like,
no, I don't know everything I want to know about you. Go.
Yeah. And you're like, what do I answer? But you lose control as the host because you've just given them the ability to take that in 3 different directions, as opposed to asking a single question and just letting it ride. So yeah, so normally it's like pro tip level type things that I'd be dealing with. So I think that it'd be way easy to just give people, or have it ready if they want, or at least you use it to make a better podcast conversation.
You know who is a real guru is and you know him, Chris Krimitsos.
Yeah. I love
Um,
Chris. Shout out.
he does Podfest,
Yep.
and one thing that I thought was interesting is you can get a media pass to some industry events as a podcast host, which I thought was pretty interesting. Especially if you're doing a podcast for your business, is to go around to the local conferences or the big industry conferences and tell them you want to set up a booth with your podcast, and you might be able to get a media pass to do that. And
Yeah, I've had a lot of
that's
people actually ask us about helping them set those up. It's become like a thing, which I'm really excited to see.
yeah. And the other thing I thought, Chris, I mean, there's a major weakness I have is marketing. And part of that weakness comes from the fact that it's a muscle I just don't use with EO360. I depend upon EO to promote EO360. Sadly, I don't think they do a very good job with it. It's an association. They're not very good at selling. They're not very good at promoting and marketing. And generally speaking, associations are not very good at selling or marketing. It's not their forte. But anyway, so I'm not very good at it either from a podcast perspective, but Chris has a lot of experience in promoting and marketing podcasts, lots of really cool ideas. One of the things he told me, and I've never done it because I'm lazy, is to do summaries. Like after a certain interview, or after a certain interview, do a whole 5 or 10 minute episode of my thoughts on that interview. Or you could also summarize, like share with other podcast hosts and say, hey, Casey had a great podcast. Here's some, this is why I think is great. This is a little commentary about it. Go ahead and listen to it. And then you play it in your podcast. You play somebody else's episode as a placeholder in your podcast. So there's lots of cool tips for promotion that Chris has given me over the years.
That's amazing. He's such a brilliant guy. And I can see the challenge you've had, because I think the most promotion I've ever gotten is from the guests themselves sharing it with their listeners. But I've found the more and more famous they get, the
They don't
least
care.
likely
Yeah.
they are, the less likely they are to share it. And so with you interviewing semi-sweet and sweet chocolate guests, like I can see that and also being a show hosted by an association, you've got a lot of challenges in terms of getting the word out there.
Yeah. True that.
Man, how do you end the show? We've heard about the prep, all the things that go into it, getting out of the intro, getting out of the gate. How about when it comes time to wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, I commented on this earlier. I just tend to promote. So I used to do this or that, or boxers or briefs.
Right.
And then I'll promote whatever it is that they asked me to promote. And if it's nothing, I'll promote what I think is relevant, most relevant for them. And then contact information, great big thank you, and that's a wrap.
Okay.
That's my wind down. I also tend to wrap up the story somehow, and it's a little bit different for every single person. So it's hard for me to give an example of that.
Sure.
But I try to wrap up the story. Maybe it's the question, something like, hey, so looking back on your career, or looking back, or what's the future hold, something like that, some all-encompassing closure sort of question.
Yeah, on some shows I've done like this introspection question where it gets into, what changes would you make, or what advice would you give your younger self, and things like, like really powerful questions. And I think it's smart that we put these at the end, because if you ask it at the beginning, it's like, I don't know you. Like, I'm not going to answer your really deep personal question right off the bat. But putting it later on in the show and you've got that trust with someone, I think helps.
So you open up your episode with the same question every time, and Guy Raz from How I Built This closes out his show with the same question every time, which is, so is it luck or hard work? That's Guy Raz's question all the time, and so I think that's interesting. Again, I haven't taken that approach, but I think it's a really good approach. Have a consistent, common set of questions that you ask, or a single question.
And then the wrap up, do you have a final thing you say? That's it, folks? Like, how do you, because I think sometimes I've seen, new podcasters get to the part where it's the end. And if you don't have a clear exit, you're like, thanks. Yeah. Hey, bro. And then sometimes the guest even just hangs up or like, okay, bye. Like you're on a phone call. So do you have a way of exiting stage right?
No, no, no. I've never felt, it's never really felt awkward, because
Okay.
I think when you wrap up with the contact, so Casey, what's the best way for people to reach you if they want to get in touch with you? I mean, it's very clear what's happening here. We're closing this thing down. We're walking towards the door.
Right.
And after they say, well, it's been really nice to have you on the podcast. I appreciate your time. Usually that's about it. I appreciate your time. You have a great day.
Yeah. And they're like, you
And
too.
then I give them a chance to say something back before I hit the stop recording.
Give them the
And
last word.
oftentimes I use Zoom for my recording, so oftentimes they'll stay with me until I stop the recording. We'll chit chat for a couple minutes and be gone.
Talk to me about that, because I feel like there's some magic that happens after the show. You've hit end on recording, you're done. You can kind of let out a common mutual sigh and then say, like, wow, look what we just did together. And then you have those sort of few magical moments where you can connect or chat.
Yeah, sometimes it's very quick, because I tend to run long in my episodes, which means that I blocked off a certain amount of time, and either I'm right up against it or past it, and they've got to go, because oftentimes the people I'm interviewing are busy, and so it's not uncommon for us to wrap it up, and then I hit record, stop the recording, say, hey, that was awesome, thanks. And they might just be pretty curt and say, thank you, that was great, I've got to run.
Right.
So there's a lot of times it's just not at all bonding. And then there's other times where there's a little bit of a virtual hug. They're like, oh, that was really nice, I appreciate it. I've
Yeah.
never gotten choked up in a pod. That's always a sign that you kicked ass, when you can make somebody cry in the podcast. High
It's so
five
true,
when that
right?
happens. Oh my, it's happened a handful of times, man. I've
Really?
had some pretty big people get choked up over stories that they're telling, and I love it when they say, man, I've never told the story before, or something like that. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
get it.
It's
Yeah.
because everyone's asking about your stupid book.
Yeah.
We want to know about you as a person.
That's right.
Those little comments, I picked up on those too. Either whether it's great question or never been asked that before, or man, the emotions, or yeah, like that really is fulfilling to me. I think that's one of the reasons we do this, is because that lets you know you're connecting.
Yep. Yep.
So afterward, do you ever, just kind of a fun aside, do you ever feel sad? Sometimes I have a moment where if they do need to bounce or whatnot, and we got off the recording and they're like, okay, bye, I gotta go. I'm like, but wait, stay with me longer. Can we spoon for a few minutes?
That's
Can we
funny.
cuddle?
Oh,
We
you're a
got this
lover.
podcast together.
I rarely, like, to be honest, like, I'm mentally exhausted
True. True.
after an interview, because um it may not sound like it based on what I described, but I am heavily emotionally invested in the conversation.
What's
And
the one thing you're most proud about with your podcast or your podcasting?
I think what I don't know if this is what I'm most proud of. It makes me feel really good when a guest says, it's when they say it with sincerity, because I don't think, and you can tell the difference. But when people say, really enjoyed that, you're a good interviewer. You asked me a lot of questions that I liked to answer. In other words, it made them feel good. The interview made them feel good. That's that I think that's what I'm most proud of, is having a conversation with somebody that wasn't just for me, but they enjoyed it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm most proud of. I'm also pretty damn proud of myself when I make somebody cry. That's cool. Not out of making it. I don't want to make people cry because I made them feel bad. I want to make people cry because they're getting in touch with something that they haven't felt in a long time. Like and I'm sincere about that. I mean it. Like I think that's pretty damn cool when that happens.
Would you be able to get us a list of some of those shows we could link to in the show notes of those interviews? Because I think
The ones where I've gotten people to cry.
Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know. I could. I'll have to look through them and see if any, and if they.
Yeah,
Like, I can't remember exactly who did that.
It might be worth thinking about, because that sounds like those were, you nailed it on those. It'd be interesting for other people to go tune in and listen, so we could put those in the show notes and people can link in and hear a master class on how to make your guests cry.
I'll look through it. Sadly, dude, I gotta go. I got an 11:15 demo.
Yeah, no worries, man.
Was...
Well, real quick, tell us, how can people connect with you? They want to reach out about podcasting, about your business, about whatever.
Yeah, the best way to reach me is my email, which is dave@propfuel.com. PropFuel is my company. PROPFUEL. So dave@propfuel.com. Always happy to talk. I'm on LinkedIn, although I find LinkedIn, there's just a lot of junk going back and forth, so I'm maybe less likely to respond on LinkedIn. But by all means, I like to talk over email if somebody wants to reach out.
Well, dude, I super appreciate you being on here. I loved learning from you, especially on this topic. We'll probably have to have you come back on, because there's 9 more things to talk about. Last question for you, sir. Yeah. Khakis or jeans?
Khakis.
Khakis. There it is.
Yeah, man.
Hey, Will, thank you, man.
I like them both, though. That's the problem with these questions. Both? Like, sometimes they can go, but Porsche or Tesla, definitely Tesla, hands down. Yeah, Tesla for sure. Hands down. Sure. I know a lot of people look at me funny. I love the sound of an engine, but I don't want one. Like, I don't need the sound. I want the performance of a Tesla.
Who needs an engine anyways? But that's it, everyone. Thank you all. This is another really cool episode of Creating the Greatest Show. We will see you all next time. And next time doesn't have to be next week. Life's too short, and we have way too much to talk about. Find show notes full of takeaways, lessons, and links at creatingthegreatestshow.com. For more information on launching your own podcast or working with us to produce your existing show, come on down to the big tent at ringmaster.com. Until then, friends, whatever you do, do it with all your might. Work at it, if necessary, early and late, in season and out of season, not leaving a stone unturned and never deferring for a single hour that which can be done just as well now. P.T. Barnum.